so that should be there. And let me see. It looks like it's up. Okay, cool.
Excellent.
Well, you've been on before. You know the drill.
I
We'll
do.
try to split a couple times, so we'll take little micro breaks twice. And if we don't
Perfect.
need any bio break, then we can just roll right back in. It just inserts a spot for ads. And if we do need a bio break, it's a great opportunity.
Awesome.
Um, and let's see, one other quick thing. So I just threw together a very quick outline that we can ignore if we choose to, but it gives
Sure.
us something to come back to if we get stuck or things like that. I didn't go super deep. It's very, very rough. But also if something comes up, there's a resource mentioned. It gives us a place to drop links, things like that. That we
Cool.
can then
Perfect.
put into show notes.
All right.
Anything else before we get going?
No, I think we're good to go.
All right. Well, let me. Whoa. Where's the JS Party kickoff? They killed all of our sound effects.
Oh no.
Well, I won't be able to do the fun JS. Oh wait, you know what? I can do the. I have it somewhere, so let me see if I can, real quick. I'll play it on my phone or something. And editor's note, Jared, when you're listening to this, like all of our media is gone from Riverside, so I don't know what the deal is there. But I will find. Let's see, JS Party music. Do I have it? It's not there. Here it is. Is it still there in Dropbox? That's the next question. There we go. Old school. Hello, JS Party people. Welcome to the first recorded JS Party of the new year, though I will say it'll be the second published because we're coming right after the New Year's party. I'm KBall. I will be your host MC today, and I am joined by special guest, the Vanilla JS guy himself, Chris Ferdinandi. Chris, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me here again. It's great to be back.
Yeah, no, good to have you on. So let's start by setting the context for this conversation. So you have a bit of a background as the Vanilla JS guy, and you have these opinionated takes. And
Just a
you
little bit.
pitched me on a new take that you want to talk through, and I'm excited to kind of dig into it. So do you want to introduce your topic?
Yeah. So you could call it a few things. You could call it the transitional web. You could call it the rise and fall of JS libraries. You could call it JavaScript is the new PHP. But it's at its core, the key thing here is that I feel like we are at the start of another wave of change in our industry. And we tend to see these waves every like 4 to 10 years where some new kind of approach or methodology or thing comes along that creates a shift in the way that we build things. The last one we had was kind of this big shift towards state-based UI and client-side libraries is the way we build all the things. And I just kind of based on some new tools that I'm seeing and kind of these emerging like talks and articles I'm seeing people write, I think we're at the start of another wave, and we're going to see a lot of the way that we used to build for the web go away as some new best practices emerge, which I think might be a good thing. Not a perfect state for me, but I think it may be a good thing compared to the way we do things today.
That's a bold statement. I don't think anyone has React going away on their 2023 bingo card yet, unless you
Yeah,
do.
no,
You're
and I'm
actually
not, to be
putting it on there.
clear, I'm not saying 2023 is the year React dies. Actually, quite to the contrary, I think React will be around. I don't want to say forever, but like jQuery is still very much
jQuery is
around in the
still
web.
well, and you know what? For the type of simple problems that it solves, it's still phenomenal.
Hmm. Yeah, if we're making bold claims, I'm gonna go on record as saying that jQuery is better than React. Um, but
Ooh, spicy.
at solving the problems it aims to solve. But yeah,
That's
so
interesting. But though you
another
could scope that.
conversation, but
Yeah, I know. Well, but we'll dive
we can
there a
do it.
little bit. I mean, you
We
could
can change
scope
it.
that down to jQuery is
Mhm.
solving very different problems than what React is
Oh
solving.
yeah, yeah. And so I specifically mean not just jQuery better in the absolute sense, although I also mean that. But I think for the problems it aims to solve, jQuery does a better job of that than React does. Um, uh, but yeah, the jQuery thing is really relevant because like most of what jQuery does has been replaced or can be done with the same level of ease using platform native technology now. Sometimes it's a little bit more verbose. And the documentation for platform native stuff is garbage compared to jQuery's documentation. But like jQuery doesn't need to exist. It persists nonetheless, mostly through kind of inertia and good documentation. And I suspect that tools like React and Vue will continue on that same trajectory, even though kind of like the new hot way that we build for the web will potentially, I don't even want to say leave it behind, but will move, kind of evolve past it. So yeah, should we dive into what I actually think is coming next, or do we want to make fun of React some more? Because I can do either. I'm totally happy with,
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
a spicy React show a little while back where we were debating the premise that React is only good at being popular,
Yeah.
which one can actually dive into the benefits
Hmm.
of being popular. Like, there's a lot of value
Yeah.
there in and of
Yeah.
itself. But okay, I'm before we make fun of React, which we can absolutely, I'm here for that. I mean, there's a lot of things I love about React. I
Yeah.
argued the side that React is actually really good at a lot of things, and while that was an assignment, I do believe that. That said, it's fun to pick on the gorilla.
Yeah.
But let's get the premise of where you think
Yeah.
things are going before we pick all the preliminary pieces to shreds.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. So kind of my my thesis here is that where large client-side UI libraries have really come to dominate, we have over the last few years started to see some pushback because I make fun of React. It does do a thing that it sets out to do particularly well. I think it potentially has like a lot of trade-offs that we don't always effectively evaluate, like the performance impacts of loading all of that client-side JavaScript and the fragility that that introduces. And so over the last year or so, we've seen people try to address some of these shortcomings in a few different ways. You've got the smaller versions that do kind of the same thing. So you've got like Solid.js uses similar patterns to React, but is a lot smaller. Preact is probably the most popular of this kind of genre, which is almost a verbatim copy of the React API, but a tenth the size. And as a result of that, and having fewer abstractions under the hood, it also actually like renders the UI a lot faster. So in many ways, it is a superior React to React. And kind of this trend has caught on so much that Evan Yu, who created Vue, was inspired by Alpine.js, which aimed to be like the Preact of the Vue world, and ended up creating his own little mini Vue called Petite Vue, which is a 6 kilobyte spin-off that has a more narrowly focused use case. So on one hand, you've got that. On the other hand, you've got the folks who have been trying to like pigeonhole client-side rendering into these UI libraries. So you've got something like Next.js, for example, or Nuxt for Vue. And they're interesting, but they do this like hybrid thing, right? Where they'll render the initial view in the UI, and then they'll ship the entirety of the library anyways, and do some kind of like handoff in the browser once that happens. So you're eliminating one problem, but you're not really kind of addressing that core issue, which is too much JS. And I say this as someone who teaches JS for a living. Like we use too much JS. So so we've kind of been circling around this idea. And then in the last year, I want to say, we've seen things shift from this idea of, okay, like what if we let JavaScript like run, in real time and do all these things, to what if we built some compilers that let you author the way you want, but, like cut out all that code and ship something that's more like old school DOM manipulation, which has a lot of benefits for a lot of reasons. So the first one that I'm aware of in this genre is Svelte, where you get to author your code in a state-based UI way. And then when you compile that into HTML files, there's some helper functions mixed in there, but the output JavaScript is smaller generally than what you wrote, and is a lot more like what you would write if you were just writing old school DOM manipulation. So if you've got kind of this UI where only one element changes, rather than kind of diffing that whole UI just to render the one thing that's changed, it's going to selectively update the text in that element, or toggle a class on a div, or like whatever the thing that needs to be done is. So you're still getting that authoring experience that a lot of people seem to like, but with less of that expense or that performance hit on the people who are using what you build. And then in this same genre, we more recently have Astro, which works a lot like Svelte, but they took it a step further and got really weird. And we're like, what if you could just bring all your favorite libraries, mash them all together, and spit out like just the code you need? So in an Astro project, you can include a component you love from React, some other component that you like from Vue. You can grab some Svelte files, you can mash them all together, and it's going to spit out mostly static HTML with some JavaScript sprinkled on top as needed, which is really, really wild. Jason Langsdorff from the Netlify developer relations team did an experiment where he took a Next project and ported it over to Astro, using almost all of the same code. He just had to make a couple tweaks to make it fit. And the code that got compiled by Astro used, I think it was 90% less JavaScript, and loaded and ran 3 times as fast with almost no changes on his end. So for me, I'm kind of in this place where I don't know if these tools are the next thing, or they're transitional to whatever the next big thing actually is. And so to give this a little context, KBall, you've been around for a while. Do you remember when, you're not as old as me, you still have hair, which is nice. But
oh, good genetics. My hair's just going gray.
It would be if I had any left. So you remember when jQuery, like the modern web could do some stuff jQuery could do, but not all of it. And people were like, hey, we still need jQuery for some things, but not all. So what if there was like a smaller thing that worked kind of the same way? So you got things like Umbrella.js and Shoestring and all these like micro DOM manipulation libraries that were supposed to be smaller. So they all went away. Like jQuery's still around. They all went away, but they kind of got us from that point to, okay, I can do all that stuff with other tools. And so I'm not sure if things like Svelte and Astro are the next big thing, or the thing that gets us to the next big thing. And so that's kind of, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. That's the whole, what I do know though is
different pieces here.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Because there's a lot of different trends here that you've kind of thrown out, and I want to pick apart a little bit which pieces you're hanging on to. So when you talk about something like a React or a Vue or something like that, there's multiple aspects to that. There's what is the developer experience, right? Like what is the model in which you are approaching your code? And one of the things that these frameworks allow you to do, if not completely, but is to think about your application a little bit more declaratively and start building up these sort of functional components rather than having to think in this very imperative world all the time, which sort of native JavaScript DOM manipulation is a very imperative, like take this thing and move it in this way. And React, once you're inside the component, it's actually, much of it is still very imperative. It's not nearly as sort of declarative and reactive as Vue or Svelte in some ways are. But at a component level, once you're piecing together the components, it actually does feel very declarative. I want this thing to happen. Here it is, and kind of happening that way. So that like developer experience and mental model is one piece of this. Then there's what am I shipping to the browser? And there's a couple aspects of that. There's like, what is the runtime there that, old school jQuery, a huge amount of what was shipped was essentially papering over browser differences and giving you a common UI over this thing that was still very much the Wild West. And that problem is solved, right? Like we have standards for browsers now, and all of the browsers that are still in use today, pretty much like, except you're on the very bleeding edge of things, they match up, right? We don't need to ship kilobytes and kilobytes of code to paper over browser differences in the same way that we used to. We might ship a polyfill here or there, but it's not this like massive problem. The third kind of piece of this is then like what volume of the application is compiled away, so to speak, is happening in sort of a pre-compile happening on the server, is happening before anything ever goes over the wire, and then shipping only the minimum amount of JavaScript out to the wire. And in many ways that feels like an optimization problem, right? It may be that you can keep exactly the same developer experience, mental model, and everything that you have in React, and compile down so that you're actually shipping many fewer bytes, which is sort of an optimization of the web platform. And that's what it sounds like Solid is very much doing. So what I want to kind of get a sense of is your take here that we're getting better at, like, these mental models may be sticking around, but we're getting better at the optimization problem and we're starting to care about it? Or is your take that actually the sort of developer experience mental model piece is shifting into as well?
Yeah, so I'm not sure, to be honest. I think the thing that's most clear to me is the optimization piece. People are finally kind of latching onto this idea that more HTML good, more JavaScript bad, or it's better to, if you can reduce the amount of JS you're shipping, like that's better for you and for the kind of like the business goals of the thing that you're creating. The developer experience piece is tough because like on one hand, I know very seasoned developers often really like the ergonomics of state-based UI libraries. And there are times where they absolutely make things easier. I think where that falls apart a little bit is like the barrier to entry for beginners from people who are not specialists in JavaScript, but are in like related disciplines within front-end development, so accessibility experts, for example. Like the barrier to entry for them to be able to participate in processes that use these tools goes way up. And so I'm not sure if the mental model itself will go away or not. I think where state-based UI potentially gets a lot easier, some like beautiful future state, is where diffing the DOM is as easy as passing a string into like the inner HTML property is today. That obviously doesn't diff the DOM, it clobbers the UI. But it would be really nice if there was some sort of browser native way to say, here's the element I want to render stuff into, here's the stuff I want to render as a string or elements or whatever. Please change just the things that need changing in the least destructive way possible. Because these tools do have like just the process of getting set up with React and understanding kind of the mental models themselves are not super complicated. but working with the tool sometimes is, especially if you're someone who's not particularly experienced, or command line is a terrifying thing for you. It's just, so yeah, sorry, it's a long-winded way of saying I don't know if the mental model will change. I think state-based UI can be a very great thing. I think thinking about things as components can be really useful in certain use cases. So that probably, I guess I'm talking myself into it here. That probably won't go away. But I do hope that the way we ship these things, and the way that like we're actually delivering the things we build, I do see that changing. When I say JavaScript is the new PHP, I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean that like we're moving, maybe moving JavaScript more and more to the back end. And ironically, in the process, reinventing a lot of stuff PHP did for us a decade or two ago.
I think that's a great place to cut. Let's. Do you need a bio break?
No, I'm good.
I might go and refill my coffee real quick. So I'll be
Go
right
for
back.
it. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Shall we jump back in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. All right. So I want to dig in to then this transition of JavaScript as a how did you say it? You said it as a server-side language. I might almost think of it as this is something that we're using to describe our application, and then it gets compiled away in some way.
Yeah. There are challenges that come with doing that, though, right? So being able to debug your code gets a lot harder when the thing that gets like run in the browser isn't the thing you typed, and kind of when that's not the source code, it becomes harder to debug and to pin down what's going wrong and kind of figure out issues. So there are trade-offs to
Back
this
on your
approach.
theme of relearning things, we might have to relearn some of the lessons that statically compiled languages and compilers have learned.
Yeah, it's I feel like there's this constant process of reinventing the wheel in our space.
Absolutely.
It gets really tiring after a while, which is why I tend to not chase trends very much until the dust settles, because here's just a little pro tip, by the way, for anybody who's earlier in your career. You don't always have to chase every new. Like one of the things I hear a lot from students is like that trying to keep up with all the new things that come out is really, really exhausting, and I agree. So just like you don't have to do that. You could just wait until one of them emerges as the clear leader, and then go with that. Like these days, I think it's really obvious that if you were just looking for like broad marketability, you can't really go wrong picking React because it's on so many job descriptions. Whereas 4 or 5 years ago was maybe a little bit fuzzier if it was going to be React or Vue or Angular or
Yeah,
whatever.
React
Anyways, I'm
pretty
sorry.
much won that
Yeah,
space.
tangent aside, but yeah.
So I think it's interesting to pursue then for folks who are currently in that world. You're writing React. What are the incremental steps to reduce the amount of JavaScript you're shipping over the wire? Now, it sounds like for many cases, it's just swap out React for Preact. How much of an API reduction do you end up with there, right? Because like, there's a reason React still exists as well.
Yeah, for sure. Although, to be fair, kind of like throw back to the other episode you were talking about, like how much of React's staying power is just its current popularity. You know, it's the old like no one got fired for hiring IBM kind of thing applied to the front end. Like React is the gorilla, and so if you choose it, you know, it's hard to go wrong. So in terms of API reduction, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure how much overlap there is between, or not overlap, but where kind of the drop off is, like what's missing from Preact that you would get from React. And from what I understand from some folks who have done conversions, the challenges tend to be more around certain certain plugins or not plugin, it's a React, certain components that you're trying to use don't always, line up 100%. So that can be a little bit of a challenge at times. But one of the other things that makes Preact a bit smaller is it was created a few years later. And so it uses some kind of native browser tech under the hood that didn't exist when React was created, and that they at the time wrote some, some abstractions or some helpers for that, just for reasons of if it's working, don't don't break it by trying to fix it. Remain in React that don't in Preact. I believe React may also have slightly deeper backwards compatibility as a result of some of that.
Well, and that is honestly one of the benefits that came up in that episode about React is that they care more than possibly any other framework out there except Ember, which is basically a non-competitor anymore, about backwards compatibility. And so, you're not going to lose your job betting on React, because when you have to update because of whatever it is, XSS bug or whatever, your application may just work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally fair. So that's so you asked, kind of like what are these incremental steps? So there's a few different layers depending on what you're trying to do. So on one hand, dropping in Preact for React is a pretty easy one. Or if you're starting greenfield, choosing one of the smaller alternatives might serve you well. On the other hand, so Astro's really interesting because it allows you to drop your existing projects in and spit out more performant code. But it's still kind of new. So I think one of the barriers to entry for it is like on certain projects, or if you're working with like a bigger kind of thing, it's really easy to be like React is battle tested, whereas Astro's kind of new and it's maybe still ironing out some kinks and things like that. I now see their website is using the island architecture buzzword, which is kind of one of the hot new buzzwords in the front end here. But yeah, so I think a next step is migrating from, or not migrating, but adding that compile step with Astro, especially if you're someone who's currently using Next. Switching over to Astro feels like a no-brainer. On the other kind of, or I guess related to that, if you're starting completely from scratch, Svelte is also a really nice alternative Rich Harris, the creator of Svelte, gave this really nice talk last year at Jamstack conference. I guess it was 2 years ago now because we're in 2023. So a while back,
adjusting the brain,
right? Yeah, still kind of trying to rewire here. But a while back, he gave a really nice talk about what's coming next with Svelte and just kind of his general thoughts on the future of compilers in general. And one of the things he talked about was how with these tools, you can use them to, with SvelteKit anyways, to render files where you don't have to choose, do I want this to be a client-side or server-side application, without doing what Next does and shipping the entirety of React and also, running it in the server. So things that are static get rendered statically. Things that are a little more dynamic get rendered mostly statically with some JS for the dynamic parts. And I believe, based on his talks, SvelteKit also provides a server-side fallback for certain things. So like if you have a form it'll do the JS, the Ajaxy form submit. But if that fails, we'll still give you a backend to, kind of call the old fashioned way. So yeah, again, it really feels like we're coming full circle, right? To these old WordPress sites with like full page reloads, but with some niceties, possibly better developer ergonomics and things like that.
Yeah, no, that sounds to me a lot like that trend of, hey, wait, we can actually do something on the server, and doing everything on the client side is an optimization, not a necessity. That definitely seems to be coming around. It's there in the React world as well. With, oh shoot, now I'm blanking on the name of the framework that just got acquired by Shopify.
Oh, I did not know.
Kent C. Dodds was on there. Why am I blanking on the name of this framework?
Oh, that's right. The thing he does, that it's his thing, right?
Well, he joined them, but why am I? Remix.
Yeah, I forget.
So they do a similar type of thing to what you're describing. Of like, they'll have the form, and they'll optimistically, do it via Ajax, but the fallback is it's just a server side action. And they really leaned into that. Oh, let's actually take advantage of all the things the web does for us. And it turns out that HTTP, the web, all these different things were well designed.
Yeah, right. It's almost like the really smart folks who did all that and kind of knew what they were doing.
Learning.
Right?
And I think this does come to like the platform does catch up eventually. Things do, I think, what Laurie Voss called transcend from like the frameworks that work well. You talked about it a little bit with jQuery, right? A lot of the things that jQuery did was expose these new, really convenient APIs for grabbing elements in the DOM and manipulating them, and the platform eventually absorbed some of them. I would love to see it do that with a state-based or functional approach to UI. That was what everybody hoped web components would do, and then web components exposed this extremely like imperative style DOM manipulation, which it may be like, I'm not a browser developer. It may be that's just like, that's how the browser, it's really hard to do that abstraction layer, but clearly all of these different frameworks are doing it.
I was literally just talking with a student this morning about how web components like come so close to being awesome, but just miss the mark for at least what everybody like thinks they could be or wants them to be, which is, a replacement for React components. I don't think they're that. But yeah. So that's the dream, right? Is that the browser supplants a lot of this stuff. Hopefully it will at some point. So we're kind of sort of veering in that direction. So one of the things that libraries do for you that's really nice is sanitize third-party data before rendering into the UI. React has their what is it? Set unsafe inner HTML or something. I know they have some really like scary sounding property.
Inner HTML.
That's right.
We had our soundboard. Amel had a great like dangerously set inner HTML. We should slice that in because
right.
It was. What's so dangerous about HTML's part?
Right. Yeah. So most libraries will provide a way to kind of prevent you from like doing bad things with third-party data. They're not bulletproof, but they are. They get you a little bit of a way there. There's not. Historically, there hasn't really been a good way to do that in the browser. There is a sanitize API that's in the works, though, that will allow you to do that. So you can pass in an HTML string and get a sanitized version of that back. It replaces either using a library like that or something like DOM Purify, which is very big and very heavy. I look forward to things like that. So it is really my dream that someday there will be like a diff property or a diff function that you can run to just throw some HTML strings out there, and make things happen. One of the other things I always hear is like, well, why isn't JSX in the browser? And for me, template literals get me like 90 something percent of the way there. They do a majority of what I want that I would do in JSX. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, they're
so
both giving you ways to essentially precompile, and write things that are in this sort of domain specific language of template like, but using JavaScript.
yeah.
And you can build you could build a whole framework around template literals. In fact, I feel like somebody's done that. I can't recall.
Yeah,
But I saw them.
HTM or HTX, I forget the name of it. Hold on. It's HTMX, isn't it? I'm dropping a letter.
That looks right.
Yeah, HTMX is built around template literals. I think actually that's maybe like the parent, and then there's like a few different tools within it. I'll drop a link to that in the chat if you want to drop it somewhere. Cool.
Cool. Yeah. So that is. I feel like we are. You're right. We are headed in that direction. That said, like, stuff has inertia. Like,
yeah,
as you highlight, jQuery is still hanging on. It took. I mean, it was React was growing and jQuery was still at 90% of the world's web for years and years and years. So what time frame are you seeing this play out on?
Yeah. So multiple years. So just thinking back historically, I imagine in 5 years' time there will still be. Well, so it's interesting, right? So like, I want to say in 5 years' time we'll still see a lot of React sites on the web, but React still represents a relatively small amount of like the web. It feels like it's a majority of the web because it's like the very popular thing that we use now, and so many job descriptions have it, and it gets talked about a lot at conferences, and it's kind of like the standard now. But it's still just as a percentage of the web itself, it's still actually a relatively small amount. Like something like PHP and WordPress still
well, new
vastly
WordPress
dominate
installs ship
over.
React now, right?
They do. Not always client side. You can, but it is it's by default primarily used in the dashboard area as part of the editor. Whereas kind of the front end of most sites is still server rendered with so many plugins still use jQuery, which is another reason why jQuery will not go away. It's because of WordPress. but yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. So timeline wise, this is one of those like weird and fuzzy things. So I want to say in about 4 or 5 years, we'll probably start to have some other tool that is maybe the new standard or that has emerged as a clear winner. Maybe. A lot of that depends on whether or not, things like Svelte and Astro are the next big thing or just the thing that gets us to whatever that next big thing is. And it's tough for me to say. Like, I'm not sure. Like, it's very clear to me that something like Solid and Preact are similar to Umbrella.js and Shoestring in the jQuery era. Like, they do the same thing, just smaller, Astro and Svelte, they have a similar kind of methodology, a certain way of authoring, but the way they actually kind of work is fundamentally different, where you're compiling things and you're shipping mostly HTML. Like Preact isn't really built on a progressive enhancement model. It's like, here's a smaller way to do client-side JS. So yeah, I guess that's really for me the big kind of fundamental unknown is, are Astro and Svelte the thing? Like, are they the next React, or are they also in that same kind of bucket as Preact and Solid and other tools like it that will eventually be replaced by some other new thing? Which, it could also, one possibility here is that the browser catches up, makes a lot of this stuff native, the tools persist for a really long time, and then some whole new suite of tools comes around to solve some crazy web problem that we haven't thought of yet. Like, web VR or some, kind of some new, just some new stuff that people are trying to do. I don't think it'll
Or
be
all of
VR,
these
but
compile to WebAssembly tools catch up, and WebAssembly gets good, is able to directly access the DOM instead of having to jump out and all of those things. And
right,
maybe
like
JavaScript goes away.
hey, I can dream, but
I don't know that
no,
helps.
no,
WebAssembly, shipping a lot of WebAssembly, it helps with
yeah,
the CPU usage problem of too much JavaScript, but it does not
okay,
help with the bytes over the wire problem,
okay, all right.
right? Because actually, WebAssembly is much more verbose in a lot of ways. You're shipping these expensive binaries rather than a higher level language.
Hmm. That's an interesting.
So
Yeah, to be
I've heard
fair,
it compared.
I'm not very familiar with Wasm, so I don't.
I've heard it compared to from a performance standpoint. You can think about it
Mhm.
similar to image sizes, right? So
Okay.
like with JavaScript, you both have bytes over the wire and you have compile and runtime. Um, Wasm is fast to parse. It doesn't have the parsing overhead of JavaScript. It's reasonably fast to run, but it's heavy in terms of bytes over the wire. So
Mhm.
more comparable to how shipping images, which
Okay.
if you've got a good network but a slow phone, a phone CPU, that's great. And
Yeah.
if you've got a bad network, it doesn't help you much.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. Um, hmm. Uh, I had a thought and I lost it because ADHD. I am so sorry about that. Um, let's see. It was related to it was just around the time that we started joking about, WASM and or WebAssembly and JavaScript going away. Uh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So related to this idea though of like maybe all these tools just kind of become that thing grandpa used to do when he built for the web, and now we've got this other thing. Is like not that so tools like Angular, people forget that like, Angular was kind of a really big deal for a short period of time. But, when tools like Angular and Vue and React like were first emerging, the idea of building large user interfaces with state-based UI was pretty novel. Not that it, didn't exist as a concept before, but it's a popular one that people really latched onto. It wasn't a particularly like popular approach to building for the web. And so I do really kind of wonder if, once or if the platform absorbs these approaches, like what will that next thing be? Because these tools always emerge to solve a specific set of problems. Like for React, it was here at Facebook, we have this really overly complex UI that has a lot of moving parts and managing it sucks. So let's build something to make that easier. And I will be really curious to see what problems emerge in the next few years with the web that we have to build a set of tools to try and solve. I am not imaginative enough to kind of come up with what that might be. I heard someone suggest VR once, and maybe, but I mean they've been talking about doing VR in some fashion for years, and it's always one of those things that like it's exciting for like a hot minute and then it goes away. Like the metaverse made it so laughable. I'm not entirely sure it'll.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
VR is one of those things where there's a lot of really valuable niches where I can see the value prop immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also some very wealthy companies trying to make it a consumer product, and it's not at all clear to me that that's going to fly.
No. Yeah. I can remember being a kid and Disney was like talking about doing some like Aladdin ride on a magic carpet VR thing with this like massive headset as like a ride at Disney. But yeah, whether or not that gets popular on the web will be an interesting one. I've taken us on a tangent though, so I'm really sorry, KBall. I'm very good at that. Um, One other thing we didn't mention, just in kind of this same vein of the web assuming some of this stuff. One of the other things that state-based UI libraries aid with, or at the very least single page apps, is the ability to do kind of like these transitions as you move from one page or one view to the next. I always hear that as a big kind of argument in favor of these things. But there is a shared element transitions API that I forget if that's like officially in the web now or if that's still in kind of development. Let's see, shared element transitions. I'm just gonna look this up real quick. But it's basically an API that lets you do exactly that. Animating your transition from one page to the next with static HTML instead of just JavaScript. So you don't have to stay on the same page. You can like load a new page and transition over. I'm having a tough time finding an MDN article on this. There was a really
you
good.
can look it up offline and we'll drop it in the show notes.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there was just a quick shout out. My friend Steph Eccles did a like 12 Days of the Web series a couple weeks ago around the holiday season, and one of the articles was specifically around this. So I'll see if I can dig that up and drop that in for everybody.
All right, let's take a cut here, and we'll come back shortly and talk about why is now actually the time, because I feel like I could have made this argument anytime in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Do you need a bio break or anything?
No, I'm good. Thanks so much.
All right, let's jump straight back in. Okay, so you've been on this less JS, ship less to the browser. I think we did an episode like a year or two ago that was JavaScript is the carbon dioxide of the web or something like that, right? Like this has been a long time thing for you.
Yeah.
And framework adoption has not gone down. If anything, I think it's gone up. And in fact, we've seen it take over more and more of the not web, right? Like things like React Native, things like writing React applications and packaging them up as desktop applications. Like these frameworks have gone bigger and bigger and bigger. So why now? What makes this time different? Why is the argument this time that we're entering this transition period and we're going to transition now?
Yeah. So before, for me, it was always like a want. Like, hey, I'd really appreciate if we'd stop using all these tools. It was. I think what's different now is that there's actually some tools that can replace what we've been doing in a more responsible way. So when I first came on the show, I can't remember if Preact was a thing or not, but it certainly didn't have the kind of the name recognition that it does now. Svelte and Astro just didn't exist. And so now we have tools we can use that replace the things we were doing before. And so I think that's a really big difference. The other big thing I've noticed is that for years, I used to shout about the performance implications of these libraries, and I would basically get okay boomered about it, right? Like, everybody has fast internet, 5G is on smartphones now, like this just doesn't matter. And certainly through no kind of effort of my own, but for some reason I've observed that people are finally starting to become aware of the fact that shipping all this JavaScript has real implications for performance and resilience in the things that people build. I don't know if we hit a tipping point where we started to ship so much that it became much more obvious, or we just had more people talking about it, and so you started to have more kind of just general awareness in the industry than just Chris the lone nut.
I wonder if the pandemic and everybody suddenly shifting to home networks instead of fast office networks made people suddenly start to realize that this stuff ain't free.
That's an interesting theory, right?
Because I at my last job, which I have left, I'm now back to being independent. Woohoo!
Ooh, exciting.
But we had an environment where there was no completely local dev server, right? You had a shared development database, but it was in the cloud. And that worked great in a fast office network, and it was bloody slow developing at home. And I
Oh man.
suspect there's a lot of other different practices, and some of this, like JavaScript is
Hmm.
free, everybody has fast networks, that are just internalized based on having
Oh.
worked in very fast office network environments.
So one thing I take for granted, I have fiber at home, fiber optic, and it is just consistently the speed I pay for all day, every day, regardless of how many people on my street are also using internet. I've kind of forgotten that when you have coaxial internet, which a lot of our country still does, and a lot of other places in the world still do, or satellite or DSL or something that like the weather can really mess with, your speeds can be really variable. Depending on how many other people are also using it at the same time. So, like the analogy I've heard used that I maybe not 100%, but I like is the idea that if you have like a hose or like a pipe with water and you open 4 or 5 spigots, the water is going to come out of each one slower than if you just open one. So it's like similar kind of concept. So with the pandemic, if you've got everybody working from home, even if you were previously like a remote employee, now when all your neighbors are also home using the internet all day on video calls, which are very bandwidth intensive, suddenly kind of that that internet speed is going to drop for everybody. Yeah, that's a really interesting idea that I had not considered. So maybe that's it.
I
A
don't know,
good thing
but
to come out of
that
COVID. No,
good. I mean, we're looking for every silver lining we can find, right?
right? You gotta grab them while you can. But yeah, no, that's I actually think that has a lot of teeth because I really did. It's just been in the last couple of years I've started to see people talking about the performance implications of the stuff we do a lot more in a way that nobody really seemed to care about. Not nobody. You cared. We talked about it a lot, but a majority of our industry did not seem to care for a long while. And I think it's one of those things where you might be right, where people have to experience that pain themselves to actually develop the empathy, which is
I feel like that's true
unfortunate.
about a lot of things, right?
That
There's
is,
there's a
yeah,
lot of lessons that can only be learned through pain. No amount of
yeah.
someone else telling you about it will fill you in or get you to
Hmm.
really understand it. I do wonder if the back to office trend will then steal some momentum from this.
Oh, yeah. The back to the office trend is interesting because a lot of people are a lot of people are fighting it.
Yeah,
So I mean there are definitely people who prefer to be at the office. But
it's lovely
yeah,
fast internet.
I'm seeing and if you're someone like if you have a family and it's like noisy in your home. I know some people just like prefer like having a quiet space or being able to socialize, whatever it happens to be. But there are also a lot of folks who just don't want to. And digital nomading is becoming a lot more common. So
Hmm.
my hunch is even as kind of businesses start to try to go back to normal, I don't expect that this trend is going to buckle at this point. It feels like we hit a tipping point, which is great. Um,
Yeah, and the tooling is making some of the things easy enough that
right.
that will help. I mean, it's interesting because coming back to the React question, like React has such of a mental presence out there. Everybody thinks React first. New frameworks are then finding ways to adopt the React API, make it look like React, make it feel like React. We talked with Mishko Hevery, who's working on this new Quick framework, which if you haven't checked out, also check this out. It's really interesting. Um, a lot of the same concepts we're talking about now, compiling things away, having pre-compilation. He has this idea of resumability that is really big. I'll drop a link in the show notes to the episode we did with him, and I'm scheduling another one, so we'll go deeper on that as well. But they very deliberately adopted the React API. They're like, everybody's learning how to write React. If we want adoption of this new framework, we gotta, the simplest path, not we gotta, but the simplest path is to make it feel like React.
Hmm. Yeah, that's I think you see that a lot now where React has really become kind of they weren't the first, but they're definitely the standard bearer. They're the one that, everybody tries to emulate. Even when new things come out, like Solid.js, uh, uses some different terms and things, but the kind of the feel and the methodology is all Reacty.
Yeah.
So
And
personally,
ahead.
if I had to choose one, if someone was like, pick a framework, but yeah, I love my HTML. That's why.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard. As you highlight, there's so many things to learn. You got to pick and choose, especially early on in your career. And React is a pretty safe bet, right? You're looking for jobs. Pretty much a very, very large swath of them have React in the job description.
Yeah, it catches people by surprise because I'm so vocally against libraries, but whenever I get asked, so what should I learn if I really want to like make sure I can get that job? I'm like, honestly, just learn React. And they're like, but you said no. I'm like, no. I want us to use less React. It's great to know how to get by without it, but it is, it is kind of the, I don't want to say the gold standard, but the industry standard now. It just is what it is.
Yep, absolutely.
Hopefully not forever though. So I'm looking forward to tools like Astro and Svelte, kind of changing the way we build.
Totally. Well, and if you're in the privileged position of not being desperate to find that next job, try exploring something else. Try out Svelte. I've been playing with Svelte again recently. It's fun. I enjoy it. It's neat, and it has that kind of like indie vibe to it in a way that like I don't know. I like.
Yeah, where I always get hung up with new tools is so many of them just use a mental model that is not how I like to build for the web. But I'm also a dinosaur who really like prefers a very like Spartan kind of dev experience, and I know most people aren't like that. So I'm in a vocal minority here.
Yes, well, you're talking to the guy who still writes everything using Vim. So
Well, that's only because you can't figure out how to exit, though. That's not.
Oh man, I have trained so well. Though I will say my hands feel a lot better ever since I mapped escape to caps lock, so I don't have to reach as far. I did that because of
Oh my
I
gosh.
had one of those old Macs with the touch bar, which thank goodness they got rid of those. But so I needed a tactile escape, but now every computer I just map caps lock to be escape because it's so much easier on your hand.
But what do you do when you need to shout at someone on the internet? That's holding down shift like a maniac.
Should I ever be in that position? Then yes. I'm rarely shouting at someone on the
I'm just giving you a hard time. Caps lock is a nuisance key. That's a clever hack.
I
like
am
that.
not the old man shouting at the cloud. I'm the old man hitting escape:*Q to get out of my editor.
Do you really still do everything in Vim? That's amazing.
Oh, absolutely. So my development environment, I have a terminal. I use Tmux. I have Tmux set up with Vim bindings. So I can do everything, hopping around, running things, going from process to process, all of that without my hands ever leaving the keyboard.
That's wild.
And it's great. And
Nice.
I've long since done the investment to map those bindings into my brain such that it's not worth trying to go somewhere else. And I at some point was trying to play around with VS Code because it turns out it's I think better for recording videos of yourself coding and things like that. And I tried to get it to use Vim bindings, but I got so frustrated because I could get within a file mapped to the bindings I wanted, but I couldn't get good keyboard bindings for swapping between files and navigating the file structure and all of that. And I kept having to go to my mouse, and I was like, why would I do these things? Like, I can do everything with my hands and my keyboard.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. I love a good keyboard shortcut.
Anyway, that's a diversion. I don't think that people generally should be learning Vim as their new onboard to the web, but
it's the future of web development. So it's time. Get on.
Periodically they do these surveys about like what are the top coders using as their editors, and Vim is always up there, but I think it's just because it's all of us old people who have spent 20 years learning all these different things, and so we're super productive now because we spent 20 years working on our productivity, but it has nothing to do with the editor.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Cool. Well, all right. So this time is different because there's more momentum, because COVID, because remote work, and because it's easier now. Was there anything else that leads you to believe this is going to be the time we finally transition away from more and more JavaScript all the time?
I think those were the highlights. Let me just quickly look through my notes. No, I think that those were really the highlights. It feels like we finally have some inertia in the industry for this. So yeah, between tooling and this renewed focus on performance, I think I think we're just headed in that direction.
Awesome. Anything else about this trend you want to highlight before we wrap things up?
No, just if anybody kind of wants to dig into this more over at gomakethings.com/JS party, I've cobbled together a bunch of kind of articles and thoughts and other conversations I've had around this. If anybody wants to explore the idea more,
awesome.
Relevant links and things like that.
Include a link. That's a clever way to both give people resources and self-promote, because I see you the Get Daily Developer Tips form right there.
Yeah. Oh, fancy that. I did not know that was there. Yeah, no, it is effective.
That's great. I'm going to have to steal that one. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for spending the time today. This has been fun. I do think, I think you're right that there's much more focus on this now. And I think this idea of sort of moving as much of the work that we do to be before we ship things to the browser as possible is one that has legs. It's ones that we're seeing, in various frameworks. I think Gatsby was one of the first for this. All these pre-compilation things. Gatsby kind of failed on the ship less JavaScript front of things, but this concept is now taking over, and you have Svelte doing a great job of it. You have Quick doing it. You have Astro. All these different things where the idea is, you know what? There's a lot of this we can figure out ahead of time, and then we don't have to ship it over the wire. The user's device doesn't have to do with it, do anything with it. And maybe what we can't ship over the wire, we can at least ship out to some sort of CDN or edge-based computing location where it'll go quickly. So yeah, it'd be fun to see what happens over the next couple of years. What was the time frame you said? You said
I suspect it'll be somewhere in the 4 to 5 year mark, just because these deeply entrenched habits take a while to kind of unlearn. You'll have a bunch of people who kind of dabble in it, and then some companies will start to use these tools, and then eventually it'll feel like it was what we've been doing for ages. Once the conference talks and stuff start to really pick up.
All right. So put a pin on your calendar, January 5th, 2028.
There you go.
Nobody's using React anymore, right?
Nobody, not a single person.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris. This has been JS Party. I think we're about here now. So go check out all the different things we talked about. Will be included in links in the show notes. And then Chris has his resource list, which looks pretty massive. Lots of great stuff on there. You can check that out as well. And I'll link to that from the show notes. But this has been fun. This is JS Party. We'll catch you next week. And this is KBall signing out. All right. There we go.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
What